Good, good.
Okay, hello, how are you? Welcome to the neighborhood. I want to take off my shoes and put on sneakers and a cardigan sweater. Anyway, before we before we leave England and jump into Wales, I wanted to kind of summarize England just by one case, and that is Henry VIII, because if there's anything that has impacted English Catholics, it is the Reformation, because for generations people hated the Catholics. And that it was even exported to the United States. There's a lot of people who were colonists and a lot of people who were immigrants went to the United States with that same anti-Catholic attitude. And even when I was growing up, I saw a lot of it where I'm from. I'm from Wyoming. Have I mentioned that? And so, but it's gotten better over the years, and it has in England as well. But Henry VIII really did a number on the church of in the Catholic Church in England. It was really awful what he did. He was really a brutal man, and he had no respect for life whatsoever. He could kill a wife or a friend with a blink of an eye. But not only kill them, but make sure that they were hung, drawn, and quartered as well. I mean, he was really a nasty, nasty individual. Well, when he died, he was 400 pounds and had the bleeding ulcers on his legs and smelled bad. So I don't know why any of those wives would think it would be a great thing to be married to him, you know. But he was a mean person, and that meanness got transported to the generations against the church. So it's sort of like critical mass. You can say so much bad about the Catholic Church, and the people really weren't in favor of Henry or his antics. But over time, if you say it enough, people start believing it. And so that's what happens. So now they're still having trouble getting away from anti-Catholicism in England and in this country in some ways too. But I want to talk about Bishop John Fisher because he's a great saint of the church. Now, John Fisher was one of the smartest bishops. He was the smartest bishop in England. He had been a great friend and advisor to Henry VII and had been a great friend. And when Henry VII died, Bishop Fisher actually did his funeral for the father. And he was Henry VIII's tutor through childhood. So that because he was recognized as the most learned man in the realm. And as a matter of fact, his favors, Henry was unhappy about Martin Luther, and so he wanted to dispute Luther. So Fisher wrote up a document to be published against Luther, and in Rome awarded Henry the Defender of the Faith title. Can you imagine? He was the Defender of the Faith after he completely destroyed the church in England. Well, he did that after he got the Defender of the Faith. And so John Fisher would have been a great friend of his, but Richard did not buy into the idea that Henry wasn't married to Catherine of Aragon. And so he wouldn't sign, a loyalty oath to support him in that, because he thought it was wrong. And he was a good friend to Catherine of Aragon. Catherine of Aragon felt that she was still married to him. So, and the thing is that he had gotten a dispensation to marry her. Now he wants another dispensation from the dispensation. And Rome said, no, you can't do that. It's God's law, and we don't care if you are a king. You still have to follow God's laws. He didn't like that. Not very much. He didn't. So anyway, then he arranged for the lawyers to declare that he was a traitor, which meant he had to be hung, drawn, and quartered. But he commuted that sentence because he was afraid of the crowd, because everybody loved Fisher. And the thing about Fisher is they were approaching the feast of John the Baptist. And, in the story of John the Baptist, as you know, is John Baptist calls out the King Herod about his illegitimate marriage to Herodias, and he didn't like it, so he beheaded him. Well, Herodias arranged for him to be ruler. Remember the story? The daughter danced for and he promised him, and so she went to her mother and said, "What shall I ask for?" And she said, "The head of John the Baptist." And so, his name was John Fisher, and people are making that association with John the Baptist, and just an unfair, unethical king who condemned him to death. And so Henry was in a hurry to get that over with, so he just had to be beheaded. Which, beheaded is, I don't think would be a whole lot of fun, but at the same time, it's a lot better than hung, drawn, and quartered for sure. So a little bit of a wink and nod to the fact that Fisher had been a good friend. But there's another story that goes with it, and then I'll get off of this. Is somebody had given the cook. His name was Richard Roux, and he was the Archbishop's cook. And they gave him a vial, and they said that won't really do any damage to anybody, but we want you to put that in the soup for a dinner that the Archbishop was having for some of his guests. So he did, and that tells you it must have been somebody he was afraid of, because he wouldn't have done it otherwise. And he never did say who told him, because he's probably afraid that he'd come back. But anyway, he did, and the guests all died, and except for one. But the effects of the poison were such that he was sick for the rest of his life. And so that thing when Russia, you have somebody poisoned and they're so disabled after that, it affects them. So his body was so damaged from the poison that he lived a horrible life after that. Well, then Henry arranged that the law be changed, that anybody who poisons anybody, it is treason, even if it's not the king, because he wanted a very hard sentence. So the cook was tried and convicted, and they boiled him alive. And that one was horrible too, because they put chains around him and they tied a winch to him and lowered him into the boiling water, and then raised him up again after waiting for a while. And that way they could prolong the suffering for a longer. So he was boiled for 20 minutes until he finally died. And so they've never figured out who actually ordered that poison. But there are two prospects. Henry might have wanted Fisher. See, Fisher didn't eat the soup because he was fasting. It could have been that Henry wanted to get rid of Fisher, but he didn't want to face the crowd. Or Anne Boleyn actually hated him too, because he had spoken out, like in the John the Baptist story, he had spoken out against him, and she wanted to take revenge on him too. And there's a dialogue that her sister, she had told her sister if she could, she would find a way to kill the Archbishop. And the sister said she couldn't believe that she jeopardized her soul out of revenge like that. So that could have pointed to Anne Boleyn had him killed as well. In both places, both people were very dangerous people, and people were afraid to deny them. So that's the story on that. That's just one example of the brutality that was waged against this. Henry VIII had no respect for human life. It didn't matter if it was a wife or a friend, kill them, dispose of them, you know. So that's what we're living with even today. So I wanted to jump to Wales because Wales is a big part of the English Catholic story. And the Christianity was actually brought to Wales, and Wales was a much larger portion of the island than it is now. You draw a line down the middle of the island, and one side on the western side would be Wales, eastern side would be the Anglo-Saxons, or on one side would be the Welsh, we would call them. Actually, they would call themselves Celts, Celtic people. That's what they are. Their language is Celtic. But it was the Romans who really brought Christianity to Wales. And by the way, Wales is named Wales because in the Anglo-Saxon language it means foreigners. So it's a name applied to them that was used by the Anglo-Saxons about them. But anyway, the Romans came, and some of them were Christian because by this time, you know, the Christianity had been in Italy for quite a long, and in Rome for quite a long time, and people had converted to Christianity. So, and when the Romans came, there were a lot of them, and they brought their wives and children as well. It wasn't just soldiers, a bivouac, but they actually settled there. And they had a rule that they let people practice their own religion, and they only had one law that they couldn't break, and that is you can't execute anybody, because they reserved that to the Romans to do that. So, but they had a problem with the Druids. You probably heard of the Druids. I mean, they'd been around a long time, and the priesthood was very, very aggressive and brutal. And they had a headquarters in an island called Anglesey, which is just offshore. And they had been bad-mouthing the Romans. They were stirring up, agitating the people to turn on the Romans to rebel. And so the Romans took revenge by going to Anglesey and massacring every single one of them and wiped out the Druids. And as such, the people were angry because they lost their religion. These are all pagan peoples. And so there was a big battle, and there was a woman by the name of Boudicca, and Boudicca was actually the chieftainess of the pagan peoples. And there was a big battle between the Romans and Boudicca. The thing is that the Romans were able to better plan the battle, and they trapped the pagans. Now there were 11,000 Romans, but there were like 10 to 1 pagans. But they constricted them to a very narrow space, and then there were volumes of javelins directed to those in the front, and killed a whole lot of them. And that caused chaos because others coming would have to climb over the bodies of those dead or dying who came before them in the battle. And so the Romans really massacred them as well. And that was the end of the pagan religion. And so the people were at a loss. And so they actually petitioned the Pope to send missionaries, and they did. Rome did send missionaries, but people didn't believe that Catholic Church could not have been started so early. But then they found in an archaeological site, they found a patent that was dated to just the 100s AD. So that's not long after Jesus died. And in the dig, they found a paten. You know what a paten is? It's the gold plate that they put the bread on and the body of Christ. And on the back of it was a Cairo. Some people call it Kiro, Cairo, which is an X with a P. In Greek, the P symbol is actually an R symbol. And those are the letters of Jesus. That's like Jesus' monogram. So that was emblazoned on the back of it. So they had archaeological proof that there were Catholic mass, most likely, that early in the country. So the people did well under the Romans, actually, and they adopted the drago. A drago is a dragon, and it's a red dragon with lion's feet, and it's on the Welsh flag to this day. And they used to carry that in battle. The Romans did, and the Welsh have that same symbol. And so, and they also had holy wells. There were 450 holy wells in Wales, and the Romans really were attracted to water sources as well as worship sites. And so there were things, and the Welsh adopted about 600 Latin terms into their language, and it's not a Latin-based language at all. It's Welsh. It's actually a Celtic language, and so that tells you how close they were to the Romans. So as such, and then Constantine, he legalized Christianity, and that was in the year 312. And as such, then the Romans were much more at ease with Christians and so forth, and they built up a strong Christianity. And the Romans then pulled out on 410. On 410, they left. They were pulled out because Romans had a lot of trouble with barbarians. They were even at the gates of Rome, so they needed their soldiers at home. And in the vacuum then came the Anglo-Saxons attacking them from the east, the Irish attacking them from the west, the Picts attacking them from the north, and so a lot of people left and went to northern Gaul, northwestern Gaul, and established some colonies there, which became known as Brittany, named after the Britons. That's what they're, the Romano Briton people. And even to this day, many of the Britain's saints are actually Welsh saints. And so that was a time when they began to reach out. They were never great evangelizers and missionaries as the Irish became to be. But they did send some people, and one was a young man, very young, who had been captured as a slave in Ireland, and then later decided he wanted to go preach to them. And he was the son of a Roman official. So that's still when the Romans were there. And his name was Patrick, St. Patrick, and he preached to the Irish and converted them. You know, to what extent, I don't know, but quite a wholesale conversion. And so he is the patron saint of the Irish, but he was actually Welsh. And but don't tell an Irishman that. They probably won't go for that. But he was. He was of that original people that inhabited that side of the British Isle earlier on. And so then Venerable V wrote in his ecclesiastical history of the English people that Olatharius was a pope at the time, and he had been petitioned to send missionaries, and they did. So Christianity got started and Catholicism got started very early. And they began to set up these, have you ever heard of an Irish cross? It's a circle with a cross. They carved really big ones. This stood very tall above the people. And that was a place where preachers would stand in front of that cross and preach to the people, because that was a place of atonement. And I think, I've never read this, but I think that that's replicating the old, pagan religion, because they were famous for the stela. These are the same people that built Stonehenge, the same people. And so I think they wanted megalithic stones as part of the authority of their religion. And so this was also the time of King Arthur, legendary King Arthur, because he probably didn't exist, but the stories about him did, and that's really centered on Cornwall. By the way, Cornwall was another group of people that were related. They were also Celtic people, and Cornwall was a people that resisted the Protestant Reformation to the very last end, because they were very devoutly Catholic. But then came the Normans, and the Normans, are great church people, churchmen, but terrible Christians. And but they really built up the churches, and they supported monasteries and founded monastic orders. And so Wales got a lot of Benedictine monks there, and they built a lot of monasteries. And even more so, Cistercian. Cistercian is a Benedictine, but of a stricter observance. And their habit is a white habit with a black cowl in scapula. A scapula is a long cloth that is in the front. So a very strikingly good-looking habit. And they were so good to the Welsh people. They liked to be far away in isolated places. And they, the Benedictine style is chapel and prayer and work, and prayer and work, and work and prayer. They're very diligent, disciplined, and they did so much good for the economy and for the people of Wales. They offered schools to educate them. They had old age homes for their elderly. They had hospitals for the sick, and they also had taught them animal husbandry, because the Cistercians especially liked to raise sheep. And it wasn't because they were cute little fuzzy lambs. It was because wool brought a good price in those days, because they didn't have all these fabrics we have now. Wool was the main fabric. And so they made a lot of money on it to support their homestead. But they also shared that money with the people. And they taught the people how to take care of sheep, the science of raising sheep. They had learned them on their own, and then passed all of that knowledge on to the Welsh people. So they also established fish farms and did a lot of fish farming and taught that. So the Welsh loved their monasteries and their monks, because they were so good to them and did so much good for Wales. And then comes the Reformation, and Henry VIII has a dissolution of monasteries, and that really almost broke the hearts of the Welsh, because they loved their monks. And then Henry VIII's son, later on, Edward VI, put out a rule to go out and smash anything Catholic we could find. So the troops came in, the soldiers came in, and dragged all the statues, all the pictures, all the paintings, everything, all the vestments and everything out. And they had to stand there and watch them being smashed. And those were objects that their parents and generations before them have purchased and bought with their own money. And so, the cruelty of the Reformation is go beyond nature. And so, so, um, so that was a sad time. And so they demanded that they instituted, I don't know if you've ever heard of Cranmer. Cranmer wrote a prayer book that was to be used in all services. If you didn't go to the Church of England, the state church, you would be fined, and then later on persecuted. So they, in some places, they had support and protection, and so it wasn't so bad in some places as others. But the Welsh to this day are still bitter about what was done to them in their church. And to heap insult on top of injury, there was a Llewellyn, his name was Llewellyn. He was the prince, the Welsh prince. He did battle with the English, but the king then went after him and defeated him. And as such, then he put it was Edward the First, and he put so I'm jumping around a bit. He put his son in as the Prince of Wales, and that's still that. I remember when I was a kid and I saw on TV Prince Charles up there at the castle being sworn in as the Prince of Wales. And the Queen just, and she's a likable lady, but it's really an insult because Welsh people took offense at that because they had killed up their Prince of Wales and substituted an English Prince of Wales. And that's been the since ever, it's that way ever since. As a matter of fact, Charles is still the Prince of Wales. He's still waiting for his mother to die so he can be king. And, but it's just not right. So I have these things that don't sit well with me. If you go to England, it's a beautiful country. It really is. Beautiful countryside. These beautiful little villages. Every village has a parish, and they all are occupied by the Church of England. So there doesn't seem like, to me, Satan was behind all of this, in a way, divide and conquer. But there's very little awareness of all the wrong that was done to Catholicism, to me. And maybe Queen Elizabeth has apologized for some of that, I don't know. But she's related to the Tudors. King Henry VIII is one of her great-great-great-grandfathers or whatever. So, and Elizabeth was a terrible persecutor of the church. She was really bloody, Elizabeth. But that doesn't get mentioned at all. But I don't think Queen Elizabeth is named after Elizabeth I. I think she's named after one of her grandmothers, the mother of Mary in the royal family. I think wasn't Mary her mother? I think so. Well, anyway, I think I've run out of time. Is that interesting? I hope so. And the next time is really good because we have the Reformation and what was done at the Reformation. And we have people who are resisting the English, and some of them actually got away with it. Did you know the vegetable that represents the Welsh is the leek? I've never even eaten a leek. So you don't grab one and run with it because then you'll say, I had to take a leak. And on that note, we are finished.